Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. Merry Christmas to everyone. I know it's the day after, but I hope everyone had a great Christmas and got some rest and relaxation, some time with your family, your loved ones, some time to reflect on the birth of our
Hey,
Savior,
folks, Erick
which we always
Stakelbeck.
try to do as a family here in the Stakelbeck household for sure. The reason for the season, no doubt. And that reason, Jesus. Jesus is needed now more than ever. Needless to say, it was a very busy Christmas day in the Middle East and not in a Christ-like fashion. Let's just say that on the part of Hezbollah and Hamas and these Iran-backed terror groups that are attempting quite literally to wipe the birthplace of Jesus off the map. Yes, Jesus, I know this is a shock and a news flash to some. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. His followers called him Rabboni, rabbi, from the Galilee region of Israel. Imagine that. Jesus was not Palestinian, as we see this popular narrative developing now in a growing number of quarters here in the West. Anything but. Jesus was a proud Jew from the land of Israel, from the world's one and only Jewish state, just to kind of get that out there. And as a Gentile follower of Jesus, I'm grafted in, and how blessed I am to be grafted in, to be a new creation in Christ. So Merry Christmas to everyone. Just wanted to start off by saying that Jesus is needed now more than ever. Needless to say, the message of Yeshua, Jesus, the Savior of the world. We're going to break down a few reasons why today. And number one, and hey, a lot's been going on. We've had a little bit of break here on the newscast over the past few days for the holiday. A much needed break, I have to say. Since October 7th, we've been going very, very hard, folks. Needless to say, here on the Watchman and with other platforms and endeavors at TBN and things we have planned coming in the new year, which I believe you will be very excited about, no doubt. So it's been a busy time. It's been, physically busy, can be exhausting. And hey, I'm not complaining. Believe me, I'm blessed. I thank God that we have this platform that we have. I'd say more emotionally, mentally draining to have good friends, dear friends of mine on this Christmas day in Gaza, quite literally on the front lines, members of the Israel Defense Forces reserves who have families at home, wives, kids. Every day when sad to say, Israel Defense Forces casualty numbers and deaths are announced, and that number seems to be growing a bit. I hold my breath and pray, God, please don't let it be one of my dear, dear friends. And any death, I hold my breath. I hate to see it all. But again, I've got some good friends who I've not been in the military trenches with, needless to say, but done some productions with throughout Israel, worked shoulder to shoulder very closely with. Keep them in your prayers, folks. Keep every soldier in the Israel Defense Forces in your prayers right now, the people of Israel. We have a biblical mandate to do just that. So that's kind of a preamble there just to get you where we're at. I said it was a very busy Christmas holiday, so we've got a lot to catch up on in terms of what unfolded in the world's most chaotic and volatile region, why it matters to you no matter where you live. The big news today, December 26th, the day after Christmas. I'm going to pull up the details for you just from my phone and read you all the specifics from the Times of Israel. This is a big story, folks. It is the headline of today's newscast. An Israeli church, a church in northern Israel, a Greek Orthodox church, was bombed by Hezbollah today. And Hezbollah saying, well, we didn't mean to strike the church. I highly, highly doubt that. Here's some of the specifics. The Israel Defense Forces say 9 Israeli soldiers were wounded, one of them seriously, in an anti-tank guided missile attack in Shomera in northern Israel. Now, these soldiers were wounded. This is how diabolical Hezbollah is. These soldiers were wounded after arriving to evacuate a civilian who was wounded in an earlier Hezbollah attack against a church. Hezbollah fired a missile from Lebanon at a Greek Orthodox church in Ikrit, moderately wounding a civilian in his 80s, an elderly man. Again, the bravery of Hezbollah, or not. So targeting a church, wounding a man in his 80s, a civilian, and then when the IDF goes in to evacuate this wounded man in a church, they are then targeted by Hezbollah and we have 9 Israeli soldiers wounded. Now, hey, I've heard a lot over the weeks of Israel, the false narrative of Israel intentionally targeting civilians and civilian targets, an absolutely false narrative. We've exposed this time and time again on the Watchman and on Israel Under Fire. The problem there, folks, in Gaza is that Hamas intentionally uses civilians and civilian infrastructures like hospitals, schools, and playgrounds as human shields. They intentionally place their rocket launchers in these civilian areas because, as Hamas interrogations have shown, Hamas jihadists who've been captured by the IDF over the past few weeks, they know that Israel will not strike these civilian targets intentionally unless they have no other choice. And if there's fire coming from these civilian targets at Israelis, folks, I'd wager to say that if Israel's rules of engagement weren't so extraordinarily strict and the measures the IDF takes to spare civilian casualties, if they didn't go to such extraordinary lengths to do that, Gazan civilian casualties, then you'd have a lower Israeli casualty count in the IDF right now. No doubt. I spoke to an Israeli government spokesman last week on the Watchman who said, look, this war could have been over on October 8th. Everyone watching that knows right now. The day after the carnage, Israel could have responded with absolutely overwhelming, scorched earth tactics and ended this thing right away. Why didn't Israel do that? Because of civilians. In a desperate attempt to save any civilian lives in Gaza that they can, with perhaps one of the most difficult missions in the history of warfare, I don't say that lightly, where you have 2 million Gazans in this tight little space in the Gaza Strip, which I believe is 6 miles wide, maybe 25 miles long. That's it. 2 million people crammed in that confined area with a demonic terror group, their overlords, intentionally using them as human shields with urban areas booby-trapped. Oh, and by the way, a massive tunnel complex stretching underneath. I can't think of a tougher mission than what the IDF is facing right now. And folks, considering the circumstances especially, they have performed admirably and remarkably. So I say all that to say, there's an old picture of, this was a political cartoon, I guess you would say. I believe it was in an Israeli newspaper a few years ago, where it showed a Hamas fighter and an Israeli fighter facing off nose to nose. The Hamas fighter had a woman and a little baby in front of him, in between him and the Israeli soldier. The Israeli soldier had a woman and a little baby behind him, defending the woman and the child. And yes, they were Gazan. They were Palestinian women and children. That gives you a window into the philosophy, and that really sums it up. But Hezbollah today intentionally targeting a church, Greek Orthodox church, man in his 80s wounded. Now, the IDF says the man is in terms of the soldiers, the 9 wounded, 1 in serious condition, 8 others in good to moderate condition. Thank God, no Israeli soldiers were killed. This civilian apparently was not killed, thank God, but he's a man, an elderly man in his 80s who got the shock of his life this Christmas. Now, the IDF says it targeted a Hezbollah site in Lebanon, as well as a building in Lebanon, on the Lebanon side of the border, to which an operative who launched the missile at the church fled to. So unclear if this terrorist who intentionally targeted the church was eliminated. The IDF also says that Hezbollah fired a missile from near a mosque in southern Lebanon into northern Israel. And the IDF says, better than I could say it, this is further proof of Hezbollah's cynical exploitation of Lebanese civilians and holy sites for its terrorist activity. Number 1, intentionally targeting a church. And we're talking Hezbollah here. We could talk Hamas all day, but folks, the bigger war is coming to the north. More on that in a minute. But intentionally targeting a church and then using a mosque as cover, a Muslim holy site, to target northern Israel. Cynical, as the IDF said, I think that about sums it up. But that's where we're at right now. Now, here's a big question for you. Will we see the international condemnation, The UN resolutions condemning Hezbollah for intentionally targeting a church and for using a mosque as cover to fire missiles into northern Israel. I won't hold my breath. And hey, by extension, how about the so-called international community condemns the real source of all of this carnage and chaos in the region? Hezbollah's patron, its benefactor, its master, the Iranian regime in Tehran. Folks, the head of the snake resides in Tehran. We've got a big development there for you, by the way. Talk about the North heating up, the Syria-Lebanon theater. A major development on Christmas Day, and Iran's involved in this, and we're going to break that down for you in a minute. Two things here before I do. Number one, imagine if you're one of these people marching in the streets right now, right here in the West, in the United States, in my backyard in Western Europe, in support of Hamas and by extension Hezbollah, and slamming Israel and supporting Hamas. How does it feel to be supporting literally a tool, a pawn of the Iranian regime? That's all Hamas is. Tens of millions of dollars going into Hamas's coffers every year from Iran, funding October 7th, the training, the weapons, and people can say, well, Iran didn't know about October 7th in advance. I find that highly suspect, number one. Number two, say Iran didn't know anything about when Hamas was going to launch the attacks. They didn't know it was going to be October 7th. They knew an attack was coming of that nature, of that magnitude, because in September, some 500 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists were in Iran training. I'm sure it's just all a coincidence. October 7th does not happen without the Iranian regime. So if you're in the streets marching in support of Hamas, then you're, by extension, marching in support of the Iranian regime. Now, you may not have a problem with that. Because if you're, I mean, look, both are demonic death cults. Hamas is a demonic Nazi outfit, a modern day collection of Nazis only wearing different uniforms, as is the Iranian regime. Not the Iranian people. Please hear this. Key distinction here. The people of Iran are the main victims of this wicked and tyrannical regime. Pray for the people of Iran. Iran is a Bible land, folks. Iran was known as Persia in your Bible. Yes, Esther, Mordecai, Cyrus, Darius. That was modern day Iran, where all of those biblical stories unfolded. So keep the people of Iran in your prayers as they suffer under this wicked regime, going on 45 years now. Hard to believe. Keep the church, the underground church in Iran, in your prayers. The world's fastest growing church, little known fact here, the world's fastest growing church is in, you guessed it, Iran, against all odds and operating largely underground and despite tremendous persecution. Do you know why? Because you can't stop the gospel. And that includes the mullahs in Tehran. Second thing to say real quick, if you're just joining us, Merry Christmas, number one. Number two, if you like what you're hearing, this is news from a biblical perspective, unapologetically. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Hey, we're fast approaching 1 million subscribers. We're over 850 now, 1,000. And we'd love to hit 1 million in the new year, not for our glory and our edification. That's not why we do this. We do it to get the message out for such a time as this, a message of truth. And the more subscribers, the more likes, the more this message will go worldwide. I'm looking at the chat right now live. We've got people from around the world with us. Welcome, everyone. India, South Africa, around the world, Europe. A message of truth, I believe, sorely needed in these prophetic Bible times in which we are living. So hopefully we can get it out more and more in 2024 and beyond. But hey, that big Iran news. Now, I talked about the Northern Front heating up. And we've seen instances where Israel and the U.S., for that matter, at least under the former administration, under President Trump, eliminated top Iranian officials. Now, yesterday we had perhaps the biggest biggest targeted elimination of a top Iranian official that we've seen in 3 years. I go back to almost 4 years, January 2020, obviously Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed terror master, eliminated by the US as he got off a plane in Baghdad to plot more terror. And then fast forward to November 2020, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, eliminated reportedly by the Mossad outside of Tehran. Fast forward now, a little over 3 years after the elimination of Fakhrizadeh, and here we have Razi Mousavi, the basically chief of all of Iran's operations in Syria. This is a big one, folks. For the past 10 years, Mousavi was in charge, essentially, and he's an Iranian general. And by the way, we've seen over the past few weeks, at least 3 reportedly Iranian brigadier generals eliminated in Syria. But Mousavi was a big fish. He was very close to Qasem Soleimani. There are photos from prior years before the death of Soleimani of the two of them together and looking very buddy-buddy. Mousavi was killed in an airstrike outside of Damascus. Here's some more, or in Damascus, actually. Here's some more details here. Now, Iranian media, always interesting to hear it from them, they say Razi Mousavi was, quote, killed during an attack by the Zionist regime in the suburbs of Damascus. He was, according to Iran, one of the most experienced advisors of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Syria. He was a member of the Quds Force. He was close to Soleimani. He was responsible for coordinating a military alliance between Iran and Syria and was believed to be heavily involved in Tehran's efforts, surprise, surprise, to supply weapons to terror proxies in the area, including Lebanon's Hezbollah. Now, Mousavi is in Syria. He's outside Damascus, and we've talked about the Damascus factor many times here in the live stream and how it's been used as a transit point by the Iranian regime time and time again. Damascus International Airport in particular. And this happens while the war in the north with Hezbollah is increasingly turning hot. I mean, it's been hot since October 7th, but it's widening. And Israel's airstrikes are going a little deeper, and Hezbollah's attacks are getting a bit more bold. And it's all the culmination. It's all going to culminate, I should say, in a great northern war. That's what we've called it here in the newscast, where Israel will eventually be forced to eliminate Hezbollah and these Iranian-backed militias in Lebanon and Syria. That's coming. Hezbollah in Lebanon, also Hezbollah in Syria, and along with other Iranian proxies operating in that country. So Mousavi's there, and he's coordinating all of this. Why would Israel choose now to carry out this strike and to eliminate him? Well, number one, Israel's going toe-to-toe with Hezbollah in the north right now, and he's trying to bolster Hezbollah forces. Who knows why he's there and what he's trying to facilitate? That's first. Secondly, sending a message to Iran writ large. Iran, look, has activated the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. The list goes on. They're the head of the snake, as I mentioned earlier, yet they aren't facing any consequences for their wicked and evil actions. Maybe Israel wanted to send them a quick reminder. And then secondly, look, we had this strike in the Indian Ocean the other day, an attack drone striking an Israeli-linked vessel in the Indian Ocean. And the U.S. said, not just Israel, but the U.S. said this drone was launched from Iran, not even from an Iranian proxy, from Iran proper, to target this Israeli-linked vessel in the Indian Ocean. So perhaps Israel is responding there and saying, that's unacceptable. And I'm being polite to use that word. Israel would use stronger terms, I'm sure. So Mousavi is gone. The Iranian regime is admitting it. So now how does Iran respond? Iran is vowing a response from the foreign minister of Iran to the president of Iran, Raisi, the Zionist criminals, and the usual rhetoric. And they're gnashing their teeth over Mousavi's death. How does Iran respond? Well, this morning, we had a bomb or an explosion near the Israeli embassy in New Delhi, India. Now, it's not the first time. About almost 3 years ago, we had a similar explosive device set off outside of that embassy. How does Iran respond? Does Iran, and this is their MO over the years, folks, do they activate Iranian assets and proxies around the world and not only up attacks against the nation of Israel via Hezbollah or the Houthis, even whoever, but look, Israeli embassies, Israeli consulates, Jewish targets, synagogues, community centers, worldwide. Iran has a history of targeting, or at least attempting to target. So keep an eye on the next few days. Will Iran's response be immediate? Is this something they're going to take more time in planning? We shall see. There will be a response, and Israel is prepared for that response nonetheless. But folks, eventually, and it might be sooner rather than later, Israel's going to have to deal with Hezbollah. Making great strides in Gaza, by the way. That campaign continues, driving deeper into Khan Yunis in search of Hamas leaders who are burrowed in the tunnels beneath Khan Yunis, the second largest city in Gaza in the south. Yahya Sinwar reared his head yesterday, the head of Hamas in Gaza, on Christmas Day, with a new statement saying, basically, we will never surrender. We're not going anywhere. This thing's not done, et cetera, et cetera. So Sinwar seems defiant, needless to say. Someone as demonic as him, I'm not surprised. But he's saying the fight is going to continue. No more hostages will be released. No more negotiations. So Israel needs to finish the job. And Benjamin Netanyahu laid out yesterday, the Israeli prime minister. Also, I told you it was a very busy Christmas day in the Middle East. Netanyahu laid out the goals. What constitutes victory for Israel in this fight? Number one, destroying Hamas militarily completely. Number two, demilitarizing Gaza. And number three, de-radicalizing Gaza and the Palestinian territories writ large, also in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. That's what we know it as. And he brought up post-war Germany and post-war Japan in the wake of World War II. And I think that's probably the closest comparison, folks. Those ideologies were crushed. Their leadership was crushed. And there was a massive de-radicalization program that the Germans and the Japanese underwent in the wake of the destruction of those demonic ideologies in World War II. And that's what Bibi's saying about Hamas. And I'd extend that to southern Lebanon when the time comes, by the way. When the time comes for Hezbollah's complete dismantlement, and that time may be at hand. Because I don't see, again, I beat this drum for weeks now here in the live stream. I don't see how those Israeli communities return home. Those 80,000 Israelis who've been evacuated from the border area, the Lebanon-Israel border, I don't see how they return home if Hezbollah is still there perched on Israel's border. They can't. It's a non-starter. The situation can't be sustained. Israel must act, and Israel knows that. And it's not going to be a diplomatic solution. The UN's not going to do what it's supposed to do, and the Western world doesn't have the stomach. Israel must act. And the frequent pushback marker we've heard is the Litani River in Lebanon, some 18 to 20 miles from the Israel-Lebanon border. That's coming, folks. And Israel's got obviously hundreds of thousands of reserves called up right now, battle-hardened, battle-ready. If you're going to do it, this seems to be the time to do it, when the country's on war-footed and completely united. War-footing, I should say, and completely united. Meanwhile, the pressure continues by the Biden administration and the Western world for Israel to wind down the fighting. Netanyahu, at least publicly, has resisted any and all pressure and said, no, we're going to finish the job. I laid it out a minute ago. His op-ed yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, he published this: destroy Hamas, demilitarize Gaza, de-radicalize Gaza, and by extension, the Palestinian areas in Judea and Samaria. Speaking of those areas, Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister, said that Israel is now fighting on 7 fronts. We've been talking about the 3 main fronts. Look, we know that Israel, which is the size of the state of New Jersey, helpful reminder, is surrounded by what I call a ring of fire on all sides. But the main fronts, obviously Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, Gaza, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis in Yemen. But then you've got Iraq and Syria. Those are two other fronts Gallant named. He also named the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. And then he named the seventh front, Iran. Now, obviously, Israel isn't directly fighting Iran right now. There's the tit for tat, Mossavi eliminated, an Israeli vessel struck by Iran in the Indian Ocean. So look, folks, it's a low intensity right now state of war at varying degrees of intensity, like Mossavi being eliminated. But that's the seventh front Gallant named. And folks, I believe eventually that will be a front in the form of Iran's nuclear weapons program. We haven't heard much about that, right, in recent days, in recent weeks, since October 7th. But those centrifuges are still alive and kicking, and Iran's still driving for the bomb. It's going to be a very eventful 2024 in the world's most volatile and chaotic region. And what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. If you're an American like me, no matter where you are, if you're an American, let me just bring this up real quick. Just overnight, the Biden administration carried out airstrikes in Iraq against Iranian proxies there who continue to target U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. We can do a whole other live stream about that, and perhaps we will tomorrow. What's happening to U.S. interests and the lack of response by the United States, any kind of meaningful deterrent response. Clearly, the responses haven't been enough, and the Iranian regime hasn't gotten the memo because they've launched dozens upon dozens of attacks, and they continue to do so against American interests in Iraq and Syria. Hey, last mention here before we go. We've got thousands watching. I mentioned those 80,000 Israelis evacuated from the north, from the northern border. You have hundreds of thousands more, probably that number at least, evacuated from the south. Israel right now is going through a massively difficult time, folks. Perhaps the most difficult time since its miraculous rebirth in 1948, certainly since 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Israel could use a few good friends right now. As a Christian, I am biblically mandated, Genesis 12:3 and elsewhere throughout the Bible, to stand with Israel, to bless Israel. I want to tell you real quick about our good friends at Meir Panim, who can help you do exactly that. It's an organization I partner with now for years. Check them out at mpgive.org. You see the information there on your screen. Meir Panim is helping those evacuated Israelis right now in their time of greatest need. People who are in shelters, staying in hotels, kids aren't in school. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare, folks, in the north and the south right now. The people of Israel need our help. And Meir Panim is on the ground doing just that in Israel, providing food, hot meals, humanitarian, medical supplies, you name it, in the north and the south. Meir Panim is there. And I support Meir Panim because I've seen what they do. I've been on the ground with them in the past, feeding hot meals to Holocaust survivors. This is an organization doing God's work. Please check them out, support what they're doing. mpgive.org. Can't think of a better gift to Israel during the Christmas season, in the new year here, than to support our good friends at Meir Panim for such a time as this. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on The Watchman. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.